I'm the head of the Estonian School of Diplomacy, and it's my great pleasure to welcome. Oh, shall we start now? Okay, it's my great pleasure to welcome you for another one of our webinars, which is being run by the Estonian School of Diplomacy and GFSIS or Rondeli Foundation. And the webinars are also fascinated by the Swedish Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. So we're grateful also to SIDA for bringing us together. Now, the topic of the day is NATO and EU Strategic Partnership Challenges and Advantages. It goes without saying that both for Estonia and Georgia, EU and NATO are in the very heart of our political thinking. And to me also, in a way, EU and NATO, together with the United Nations system and international law, are the very four cornerstones of post-World War II stable and liberal-leaning world order. And well, as we also mentioned in our invitation today to the webinar, both EU and NATO are currently envisaging new strategy documents. They are engaged in soul searching, and both of these strategy documents, Strategic Concept 2030 for NATO and Strategic Compass 2020 for EU, they are looking at the new challenges we are facing collectively, and it would be very interesting to see what kind of vision our partners in the EU and NATO come up with in spring next year. Well, we are looking at the challenges from a strategic point of view, but also it can be that the current security challenges might be blurring the vision of EU and NATO. I mean, chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, AUKUS deal with Australia, tensions in the Indo-Pacific, of course, Belarus and Ukraine big on our agendas today. So, yeah, these tactical or short-term, hopefully short-term challenges are also obviously influencing NATO and EU strategic thinking. And what do the demands for EU strategic autonomy mean? So we have two excellent speakers and discussion partners here today joining us. The discussion will be very informal and followed by questions and answers. And if I may, I will introduce President Kaljulaid and then hand it over to Alex Petriashvili, who will introduce the Georgian speaker, Ambassador Grigol Galobilishvili, and looking forward to a good discussion. President Kaljulaid has served as the President of the Republic of Estonia from 2016 until the last month of current year. During her time in office, she made her presence felt in both her homeland and the international arena. Her activities and outreach were instrumental in Estonia becoming United Nations Security Council, a non-permanent member. And President Kaljulaid has become a sought-after speaker at high-level forums on digital, security, and foreign policy topics. And she has also been nominated this summer by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to the position of global advocate for the Every Woman, Every Child strategy on the health and well-being of women and children. And she was also the first Estonian to be featured in the Forbes World's 100 Most Powerful Women. So many thanks, President Kaljulaid, for being with us. I will hand now over to Alex Petriashvili, whom I know for a long time, who is a good friend and who has also served Georgia in the position of a minister, being a state minister of Georgia on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. So, Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Eke. Good evening, Madam President. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you tonight with us on this webinar amid the very turbulent and very rapidly developing security issues in Europe and then globally as well. So it's a great pleasure and honor to do these webinars with Estonian Diplomatic School on behalf of Rondeli Foundation. Once again, I want to thank you for doing this excellent job together with us. And also, this is a pleasure for me that we have one of the best Georgian diplomats with 20 years of diplomatic career, the good friend of mine, Ambassador Grigor Galoblishvili, who is who has served as an ambassador of Georgia to NATO. Before he was the ambassador of Georgia to Turkey, and he was the Prime Minister of Georgia, and now he is at the Abu Dhabi Defense College as a distinguished professor. Correct me if I'm wrong. Grigor, it's a great pleasure. It's an important issue we are going to discuss today, and without further ado, President Kaljulaid, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Since we are today discussing the global picture and the EU and NATO's role in this and how we see our cooperation and how we also plan to overcome some of the question marks of the cooperation efforts of the European Union and NATO, I would start with the obvious, that if we care to compare today to the situation of the Cold War, maybe it's an adequate comparison, because right now the situations between free and democratic world and some of our competitors is roughly at the same level of animosity, I would say. Then the fair comparison easily demonstrates to us that if during the Cold War time the global threat and the threat in Europe were the same entity. It was the Soviet Union and its mighty military capability, nuclear weapons, etc. Then now the picture is not as simple looking at it from Europe, because there are other global geopolitical competitors. There's China, and in addition, our European common adversary, which is Russia, with some of its satellites, obviously is looking far less powerful to our transatlantic partners. And hence there is kind of a common understanding on both sides of Atlantic that Europe has to be able to take care of itself, while America is tied also in the discussions about the other regions. And therefore, despite it is very often presented as if we have a conflict somewhere in between Europe and NATO discussing the strategic autonomy, I personally do not see it, and I've never seen it this way. I see it as Europe recognizing its responsibility. And Europe has taken several steps in order to strengthen Europe's capabilities in the future. Short-term steps, by the way, are not in the hands of the European Union, because the European Union is about cohesion and development. But for example, if we look at the European Defence Fund, then what is the objective of the European Defence Fund? It is to harmonize the new technologies we use in defense industry in Europe to the effect that they could interoperate. If we develop them together, we could make them more functional together, interoperable. I would stress not monopolies, because we've all seen that only the promise of spending 2% has put inflation in defense sector well far higher than other sectors. But to develop interoperability and therefore a competitive defense industry which would serve Europe better. But this is a long-term objective. I personally think that European Union can only have long-term objectives in developing European defense ability. And in this, it always has to also consider itself as in a supportive role of NATO, which is about territorial deterrence and defense. And of course, you may ask that, I mean, there are different members of NATO and different members of the European Union, but they do overlap. And they do overlap also on the wider common platform, which is our common shared liberal democratic values. And we must never forget that whatever our debates, this is our common point. We are defending not only the territorial integrity, but the democratic way of life globally. And even if we argue, and even if we have arguments like what is the Union's role, what is NATO's role, what about AUKUS and all these other issues, I mean, we finally always have to remember that if things really get difficult, we do stick together. And I think we shouldn't doubt it really, because, for example, if you look precisely at the current ongoing crisis, I mean, there are many issues which European Union and Warsaw have been arguing about for a decade now. But when the going really gets tough, we put these issues aside and we do work on the issues on which we immediately and urgently have to react and co-react. And we are getting it done. We can see it already now. So it's natural that we discuss, it's natural that we have a debate because the situation globally is emerging. But Europe is recognizing its responsibility. For me, strategic autonomy means that European forces jointly taken together should be able to conduct necessary operations in its own surroundings independently. But of course, these forces at the same time remain NATO forces. Nobody is going to build double structures. This has been made very clear also by EU-NATO agreements that we do not build double structures. But Europe has to be capable, as High Representative Borrell said very clearly in his first representation at the Munich Security Conference, to be assertive, Europe needs capabilities. And this recognition is good. Of course, here in the Baltics, we are independent. We are really independently spending 2% already. I mean, independently from NATO's call from 2014, we've been spending 2% and more, and we are impatiently waiting that everybody spends 2% and so on. But I mean, we've seen that there is thinking in this line and even some growth. NATO has more resources, as Jens Stoltenberg always stresses. No, we are moving closer towards this pledge, and therefore, I would really look at the facts and also understand that even among the friends, you do not achieve results without really constantly discussing. You may even say arguing about how to best achieve these results. So all in all, I think we recognize our common responsibility is protecting the free and democratic world order. And while doing it, we are able to put aside the tense issues when the going really gets tough. And this has been demonstrated. That's why I am optimistic, which of course doesn't mean that we could stop reaching out constantly to each other and reaffirm that we all feel this way and we all are ready to act and react this way. I think that's enough for introduction, and I'm looking eagerly forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And also I would like to remind the participants that please feel free to put forward questions in the chat room. So it would be good to continue after Ambassador Ngaloblishvili's remarks with good discussion based on good questions. But Alex, over to you. Yeah.
Rigo, please.
Thank you so much, and again, thank you for invitation. So what I'll do in my brief intervention, I want to approach in a slightly broader perspective on a transatlantic dynamics and relations, and to introduce more a Georgian lenses, Georgian perspective, how we from Tbilisi, from Georgia, look to those developments, and probably touch a little bit on dynamics in the region as well. So, and I wholly agree with Madam President that what we are witnessing right now is a very important shifts and changes in a distribution of power at a global level. We have a new players or the old players becoming stronger, and we have alliances and allies responding to those emerging threats. So this is normal. However, when we look to the dynamics of transatlantic relations, I think that there were higher expectations when President Biden was elected, that some of those issues, some of those problems that took place during the recent years somehow would be smoothened over this past few months. However, from my perspective, what happened is that those expectations haven't been realized. And you probably mentioned some of the reasons, but let me highlight a few reasons why I think that those expectations haven't been realized so far. First is obviously the AUKUS and the US decision to form a new alliance in the Pacific region. Again, the way how this alliance was formed obviously created some issues, some diplomatic rifts between some EU members and US, but that's, from my perspective, is less important. What matters here, and I think that what AUKUS is clearly indicates, is that it indicates the US foreign policy's trajectory. Trajectory that is that US in coming years will devote its resources and energy more to the Pacific region. Why? Because the main competitor is emerging in this part of the world, China. Now, in other words, what we see right now is Biden administration's attempts to operationalize what President Obama years ago labeled as pivot to Asia. Now, when we look from our perspective, the question is, how does it impact, or will it impact, the US commitments and engagement in other parts of the world? It doesn't mean that US will be less committed, but there are the questions in this regard. Now, I also wholly agree with Madam President regarding the strategic autonomy and discussions surrounding the strategic autonomy. But when you put it into a context on one side, when you see this kind of a trajectory of US moving gradually or refocusing its attention more to Indo-Pacific region, and in the same time, there are the discussions on Europe's strategic autonomy, especially in defense and security spheres, there are certain, I wouldn't say fears, but questions, how it's going to impact, again, US role or US commitment in European security. And my final point in this larger picture is, as Ambassador Eke, you mentioned, this chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, what it indicated is, I mean, not a decision itself. There was not an issue regarding the decision, but again, the way how this decision was implemented created some question marks regarding the level of consultation, especially at the initial level of initial stage of withdrawal between the traditional allies. So if we look, if we put all those things together, what we see is that on one hand, we see US refocusing its foreign policy priorities towards Pacific Indo-China region. EU is discussing strategic autonomy, and level of consultations are not sometimes all the times at the level we would like to see, but it happens between the partners. It's a normal as well. Now, if we move at a lower level, how it can be translated into the region, and I don't want right now to discuss what's happening in at a Polish border or at a Belarusian Polish border and Ukrainian Russian border. So it's a classical case of the Russian playbook. So the Russians are doing what they have done so far. They are combining military, non-military means to intimidate European allies. But I want to focus on slightly different aspects, slightly different issue. What happened in our part, in our region, especially the recent, relatively recent, year ago, initiative of one of the NATO member states, who after the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict initiated so-called Platform of Six, or we in Tbilisi call it 3+3, basically meaning that three regional powers, Iran, Russia, and Turkey, would form a new platform together with three South Caucasus countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And if you put it into a larger picture and in a context what's unfolding right now, you see that it's again another clear attempt at a regional level somehow to weaken the role of NATO and EU when it comes to the regional actors like the South Caucasus countries, or if you adopt a little bit more pessimistic perspective, it's an attempt to introduce this old notion of the spheres of influence, where three regional main players are trying somehow to carve the region. Now, all those developments obviously has an impact on a domestic level as well. And I have to admit that I have never been so concerned in my professional life as I am today. And I'll give you an example. Whenever I was traveling, or I'm traveling to Georgia, and years when I had a discussion with my friends and colleagues, the question we were asking each other, me and Alex, for instance, was when Georgia can replicate the success of Estonia, where Georgia can replicate the success of the Baltic states. The question, what we are asking each other today is, are we on a fast track to become, at the best case scenario, Yanukovych's Ukraine, or in a worst case scenario, Lukashenko's Belarus? That's a question we are asking today. It's not a question whether we are going to replicate the Baltic state success or not. And if you just even from unarmed eyes look what's happening in case of the president of Georgia, just simple facts. We right now we have in jail the president of Georgia, who is denied the basic healthcare rights that other 700 inmates annually do enjoy. We have a president of Georgia in prison who is denied the most fundamental rights of judiciary or legal system. That's to defend yourself in front of the court. All the recent court trials were conducted in absentia. We have a president who is under constant psychological and even physical abuse, and those tapes were aired recently. I think that many, even beyond Georgia, saw those tapes. And reaction, unfortunately, is by Georgian authorities denying, for instance, the public defender of Ukraine to enter the prison, denying the member of European Parliament to enter and see the President Saakashvili, just to see what's happening. And again, this is those are the tendencies. Those are the tendencies that ring I would say more alarmistic bells towards the trajectory of where Georgia is moving to. And I think that again, in this larger context, when we are looking developments from Tbilisi, we see pretty unfavorable international environment right now. We see not so easy regional dynamics, and we see a very alarming domestic events unfolding around us. So my apologies for this very pessimistic view, but that's where we stand right now. That's how you see, probably, at least from my perspective, the developments at all three levels. And I'll stop here and pass the floor back to Alex.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'll pick it from here. While President Kaljulaid was actually finishing her remarks on a positive note, meaning that that we all feel inside NATO and inside EU, then when the going gets tough, we can pull our acts together. And then on the other hand, while Ambassador Galoblishvili kind of wrapped his remarks up, then his thinking was relatively negative, taken that the political situation in Georgia is not really a pleasant one. And of course, NATO and EU as collective organizations, they are facing external challenges and threats, which makes it difficult for NATO and EU to consider enlargement. So actually, now I'll also bring in the first question that has arrived in the questions and answers section. So, and NATO and Georgia, the possibility of Georgia, obtaining a map membership action plan finally. What are your kind of considerations there, Alex and Ambassador Galablishvili and President Kaljulaid? Georgia's future ambitions as to NATO and the EU.
Should I start or should Ambassador Galablishvili start? I mean, I'm an onlooker and I'm a really worried onlooker, but I have to say that the responsibility, and I think the ambassador also hinted at that, I mean, the responsibility finally relies with the Georgian people and Georgian state. And indeed, it is an error which is quite often made that because European Union and also NATO leaders strongly support, peaceful development of whole European Eastern neighborhood, and peaceful development for us all also involves, of course, rule of law development, media freedom, respect of personal rights, and so on. We do support it. We are ready to wholeheartedly also to help to achieve this. But I mean, Europe is not in this way assertive like maybe some other global geopolitical competitors are. It does allow countries to decide for themselves which part of the kind of global thinking they want to be part of. So if Georgian people and Georgian state does not demonstrate its willingness to apply, let's say, Copenhagen criteria, then European Union accepts this too as the choice. And this is material difference. I mean, like China has declared in all contexts, but also notably in UN Security Council when we discuss Afghanistan, we talk to everybody. I mean, Europe is conditional, but at the same time, it does accept different choices by different countries. For example, it does count among its eastern partners also countries who clearly are more linked to Russia. I mean, also in the economic sense, where they do apply Russian standards, therefore can never apply the standards Europe asks them to agree to apply to reach, let's say, deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Europe is not assertive; it is supportive, and the decision rests with the Georgian people. And this is something which I sometimes have found missing in understanding in our Eastern Partnership countries. Yes, we do need peaceful, united, and territorially complete Georgia and Ukraine. Yes, we are ready to support the development, but we are not going to, let's say, police the development which from our side are regrettable in these countries. I mean, for example, the fallback on media freedom or personal freedoms, or the trust into the rule of law. And this is something which therefore is wholly and truly the responsibility of Georgian people to achieve that they fulfill Copenhagen criteria, and then hope that the global kaleidoscope at one point will turn this way, that discussions to accede to the European Union could go ahead. I mean, there are positive signs even now where Europe is holding a handout. For example, Georgia is now able to participate in European Union research and development budget branch, which also for us in Estonia, for that matter, was the first area where we could fully start to cooperate with Europe. And so there are positive developments, but indeed, I am also very worried seeing the fallback of what I would say on Copenhagen criteria in Georgia. But as Ambassador so rightly stressed, the responsibility is with Georgian people.
And if I may take from this point, and Madam President, I wholly agree. I think that our aspiration to become part of a free world or to become members of European Union and NATO has two aspects. One aspect is the Georgian people, and I'm so glad to observe that even during the political upheavals, or sometimes, and US from Estonia know sometimes how frustrating this process might be. But during this process, I think that the Georgian people continuously demonstrated their unwavering support to Euro-Atlantic integration, to return to the European family or becoming members of a free world. Now, that's obviously a positive aspect. Where we certainly need the assistance of our allies and strategic partners is when there are clear signs of deviation from those values or from this path by authorities. And again, it's also important to stress that those organizations are not a geopolitical entity. Those organizations are institutions that first and foremost are based on values and shared values. But once the authorities, they deviate from this path, then there should be a political price. Because, and I mean, again, once, and I'll give you an example, for instance, there was a few months ago, there was a very important agreement mediated by EU Commission. And at the end of the day, Georgian authorities withdrew from this agreement, simply didn't fulfill this agreement. So once this type of things happen, there should be a political price. Otherwise, and this is a logical deterrence as well in security domain, because if an violator doesn't pay a price, why he or she should stop? He or she will continue doing the same things. And that's what we have observed, especially in this few recent months. So my only request at this stage is please be vocal. Please, once you see the clear deviations from those values that any European nation should uphold from authorities especially, please be vocal, and sometimes please force them to pay a political price, because that's what at the end of the day matters. That's what may stop this kind of a stream of irregularities which we have witnessed recently. But on the other side, and now I'll try to again to finish on a positive note. Now on the other side, clearly there is an overwhelming support by the Georgian people. Georgian people, almost more, any poll indicates that almost 80%, more than 80% of the Georgian people support Georgia's membership both to EU and NATO.
If I may add, I mean, I do agree with you that there needs to be a vocal exchange of opinions, and there definitely is. European Union ambassadors regularly assess together the situation in Tbilisi, and they talk with a united voice as well. So this is done, and of course the political price. There is one anyway, because I mean, if there is less optimism in Europe, in Georgian democratic and rule of law development, then there is less enthusiasm to spend and support as well. And also, of course, if such is the situation, then there is the investment gap, I mean, which is anyway considerable, well, because many people do not dare to invest in the region if they do not understand what its geopolitical future and choice might be. This is the price. But the question is whether this is the price which simple people recognize, or is it something which gradually kind of happens, so you do not recognize and you do not notice it, I mean, it is something which people simply, I mean, learn to live with, and it's therefore noticeable for people. Then, I mean, there is no investment, let's say that's 10% of less investment, there is 10% of less, let's say, European participation in developing institutions in the country. Is this something which local political system can also overlook and present as if nothing is going wrong, whereas we all know that in the long term this is exactly what is going wrong, and this is sometimes very difficult to get right. And I admit, I mean, these signals, I mean, they do not look like flagship signals, but they are there anyway. This is obvious, as always.
And Madam President, you mentioned our neighbor, and just to complement what he said, I remember in my years when I served as a Georgian ambassador to NATO, there was an unwavering support of all three Baltic ambassadors in NATO towards our mission. I always considered those missions, those embassies, like my own, because this was a place where we had consultations all the time. But they supported me not because they liked Georgians or Georgian culture, because they had a hope that Georgia is a similar type of democracy as the Baltic states are, or Georgia shares the similar values as Baltic states share. And because this is a scarce commodity in our part of the world, you don't have many democracies in our part of the world. This is what we have to cherish. But what we see right now is that we are, again, if we lose, and I think that we are on a fast track of losing that, then the only partner that will open its arms is our neighbor in North, because they don't care about values, they don't care about democratic credentials. So again, this is from my perspective, it's extremely important that our partners, our strategic allies, when they see the developments, what's happening right now in Georgia, if they see at an early stage that we are on a fast track of becoming, as I mentioned already, in a best case scenario, Yanukovych Ukraine, or worst case scenario, Belarus, that's the time to step in and to force those people who are behind the wheel somehow to, if our partners cannot stop them, at least to make them to pay the price, because that's the only language they may understand.
This is an interesting idea, which I think we need to also here in Estonia, maybe in the context of our work with our Eastern partners, to look and analyze, because it is always this. I mean, if you are abrupt, then you push, I mean, your partner into the arms of those who are not conditional. Sure. If you are not conditional, on the other hand, then you do not achieve this value-based partnership, because the values are not shared. So it's not there is not an easy way forward, or an easy change of approach which you seem to be requesting. But I think we need indeed to tread this fine line and find the balance. I mean, to be really clear that, I mean, that what Europe is doing with Georgia is always conditional on respecting the values which Europe expects of its partners. Europe will still work with Georgia, which does not share our values. Europe works with, I mean, all geopolitical adversaries as well. But of course, we realize that, I mean, there will be different limits, different standards, and different hopes for future. And if you have ideas how we could get this message more clearly across, then of course, we would be very much interested also in the context of Estonian Eastern Partnership policy making to understand these issues. Right now, what Europe is doing, Europe is being very vocal. Europe is demanding respect of rule of law, development of rule of law, well, also respect of personal freedoms and media freedom. And well, this has been our claim for years. I remember when I became president of Estonia, it seemed quite feasible to nag my former colleagues at the European Union institutions about, I mean, enlargement, involving also Georgia in these discussions. And there wasn't really a really good answer that if we discuss, let's say, Balkan, why not also to involve Georgia at least in the discussions? I mean, not to maybe give any dates or promises, but at least when we talk about enlargement, also talk about Georgia. I admit that 5 years ago, I felt stronger pushing this point than I would feel today. And this is the worrisome development, definitely. Georgia was among the Eastern partners, the front runner in developing rule of law. There were some questions of media freedom, always there were, so on. But now the question marks, well, there are more question marks definitely than there was. Take this then as a strong signal from me for what it matters. But I'm really interested in continuing to understand what also people in Georgia who worry about, I mean, moving away from the rule of law, what they could consider as a visible and important signal which will be understood by the local political elite and also by Georgian people.
Dear panelists, in the webinar introduction, or in the webinar concept, well, two strategic papers were mentioned: a strategic concept of NATO and EU strategic compass. And there's a question also put here by someone from the audience, that to which extent do you expect Georgia to be involved or to be mentioned in these strategy papers? I mean, the former NATO strategic concept was, I think, adopted 2010, if I'm correct, 2 years after the infamous Bucharest summit, right? So, this is actually maybe a question to the Georgian participants also, that to which extent would you expect Georgia and Ukraine, both of them, to be mentioned in the strategy papers?
Since I haven't been part of the deliberation process or discussions on this very matter, so I'll just very briefly give you my perspective, what kind of strategic concept I expect to be adopted. I think that one very important issue, probably one very important core task that probably NATO will be moving back to is moving back to a collective defense. I don't want to say that NATO has ever distanced itself from collective defense, but I think that, again, the idea of collective defense will be very much strengthened in this new strategic concept. There will be, obviously, the other core tasks of NATO will remain there as well, but I think that the emphasis will be on a collective defense, because the environment has significantly changed since 2010. I say, and Ambassador, you mentioned that the previous strategic concept was adopted in 2010, 2 years after the Georgian-Russian war, but I don't think that there was still a wider acceptance or realization of this threat that was stemming from Russia at that time. It had to take Ukrainian invasion for our Western partners to eventually to face the reality. So, and then again, there are some other challenges, like the challenges arising in Indo-Pacific region as well. So again, my perspective is that it will be mostly centered on the core principle of NATO, that is a collective defense. Whether there will be mention of open door policy and integration, I think that there will be a mention of another very important principle, that is NATO's open door policy. But I myself personally, and again, just with a caveat that I have not been part of a deliberation process, myself personally, I don't see at this stage NATO sending a very strong signal in this direction, simply reiterating the basic principle of the open door.
I tend to agree with you. I do think indeed that NATO will consider working with allies and like-minded partners in the region as strategically important, which it will continue. And also, if I think from the European Union side, there will be definitely a strong emphasis on working with Eastern partners, economic development and cooperation, social cohesion. But it will all actually be, I would say, not written in the language which would indicate that sooner or later we will see enlargement. Let's say this is what I think will be the case. What concerns in general the strategic compass is, then, as I said, Europe is recognizing its responsibility for its surroundings 360 degrees, recognizing also that we can support our transatlantic partner first and foremost by being able to take care of our own regions ourselves and our own neighborhood ourselves. What concerns NATO, then this is very interesting, because NATO sees that on top of all the conventional risks, which it has always taken into account while discussing territorial integrity, it also needs to redefine for 21st century basically all our thinking of what is conflict, what are weapons, and what are domains, because you cannot differentiate nowadays so clearly. I mean, what is conflict, what is adverse activity leading maybe towards the conflict. This is all quite blurred. And I mean, having a little bit better visibility in this new and changed world, where, I mean, countries could be affected by the actions which we see currently at the Polish borders, could be affected by the cyber actions, and also could be affected by the technological developments which can be weaponized, haven't been so far, but can be easily weaponized. And NATO here has a challenge compared to our strategic competitors, for example, China fully controls technological development in the country and by its companies, whereas we have to rely very much on what goes on private sector and learn to incorporate these technological development into our defense thinking. So we have to be, I mean, open that there are many challenges, and therefore, indeed, I agree that, I mean, the issue of what is outside of the borders of the alliance, or also for that matter, European Union, this, I mean, will be strong support, but it will not be kind of trying to do that much more in order to make sure that in the future we could enlarge. On the other hand, Estonia will remain a strong supporter of the open door policy, because for us it's a moral issue. We cannot close the bus doors and drive away without our Eastern partners. So we'll keep pushing, we will keep nudging, but at the same time we keep pushing and nudging Georgia and Ukraine also to really reach the stage where European countries will have to ask, why not Georgia and Ukraine as members? And this is the ambition which the countries must have. For us in the 90s, this was exactly, we knew, I mean, we might be accepted, but only if the question is, but why not? They are like we are. And this needs to be achieved. And then history could be fair or unfair. We don't know what will be the future developments and situation. But there is at least a chance that if history is fair, then the best things could happen.
Thank you, both panelists. I noticed that actually there were a couple of questions related to Georgia's territorial integrity and NATO and possibly also EU aspirations. So the logic is that since Georgia does not have borders, does not control its borders, therefore Georgia cannot become a NATO member. And there was also a suggestion by Andreas Halbig that perhaps by recognizing Abkhazia's and Tsinvali regions' independence, Georgia would kind of be eligible for NATO membership. I understand that Andreas Halbig is not a Georgian, well, suggesting by the name, and I actually do have the feeling that this idea of recognizing Abkhazia, Tsinvali region is an absolute non-starter with Georgians. But how do you feel about the unsolved border situation? And again, bringing an example to our Georgian friends that for a long time, Russia expected that Estonia not having a signed border treaty with Russia would be an impediment for Estonia's EU and NATO accession. And at the end of the day, we managed to join EU and NATO, and we still do not have a signed, okay, we do have a signed, but we don't have a ratified border treaty with Russia. So the unsolved borders as an impediment to Georgia's aspirations. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, Ambassador, you mentioned, I mean, you touched upon two issues. Let me start with the recognition issue. And I think that the recognition issue is not only a political, and you are absolutely right, politically it's non-starter, but it's also a moral issue as well. And let me explain why. By recognizing any of those entities as sovereign states will be somehow legalizing the ethnic cleansing that took part in this part of the world, in these two Georgian regions, because hundreds of thousands of the Georgian citizens were forcefully expelled, and it was recognized as ethnic cleansing. So that's why, I mean, again, it has both political and not only legal, but I would argue a moral dimension as well. Now, when it comes to how countries like Georgia or how countries that have border issues or whose territories are under occupation can move forward. Now, and I think that it's a bigger issue, not only for those countries, but also for alliance itself as well. And let me explain what I mean here as well, because Russia developed a playbook. If Russians want to impede or stop somehow integration of any state, then what they usually do is they provoke some kind of a conflict, which eventually transforms into either ongoing occupation or annexation or some sort of a border dispute. And then this border dispute or occupation itself becomes an impediment for target countries to become the members of alliance. So Russia implicitly, if we will be very frank, exercises the veto right. So Russia, by developing this playbook, I mean, not because someone allows Russia to veto or to interfere, but Russia does it on a practical level. Now, what is the way out? And I think that, again, historical analogies are not always 100% similar or correct, but historically we have and we had cases where countries whose the countries which couldn't control their borders became the member of European Union. For instance, recently the Cyprus, for instance, or before there were countries who had the border issues. Or even if we go deeper into history, in the case of Germany, became a member of NATO as well. I mean, now, is it an easy decision? It's an easy no. It requires a very strong political will and a strong political determination to bring those countries in. In a current state of affairs, I'm afraid that those conflicts at a practical level will be always used as a barrier of entry for those from those countries who are a little bit overall skeptical in the process of EU or NATO integration. So that's where we stand right now. But again, there is a way forward, and I think that we have historical analogies, and in case both Georgia and Ukraine share the values, share the democratic values with their allies, there is a way forward to bring them in.
I totally agree with this position that we can never argue that you can blame the victim and therefore, I mean, not anymore discuss enlargement of European Union or NATO, because it does indeed give Russia an incentive every time somebody turns its back to Russia to bite this back. I mean, and this is what we saw in Georgia, and I do think that partially because of the weak reaction of value-based West to this avalanche ended thereafter in Ukraine. When Ukrainian people turned to West, similar fate waited them as happened in the case of Georgia. And indeed, if we never mention in our rhetorics enlargement of the European Union, notwithstanding, I mean, the other issues, I mean, but precisely because of partial occupation, then I think indeed other countries among Eastern partners who wish to turn closer towards West, and for example, right now there is Moldova, who seems to very clearly have indicated this kind of hope for its own future, then we risk similar negative developments. So indeed, I think that the necessary signal would be to say that if that were the only problem, then enlargement could be considered. The partial occupation were the only problem. But as I said, I mean, for that discussion to start happening, the countries who wish to see EU enlargement into their own countries need to clear away all other obstacles, which is not the case neither for Georgia nor for Ukraine today. And indeed, of course, when you put this today, it's very easy to say that, but look at themselves, they are not like us. And if that argument is still there, it's very hard even to achieve discussion about this second argument. And that's my worry, and has been my worry indeed, and continues to be. I would really hope that one day we could ask in Brussels this question, that this is indeed the only problem which we now see with Georgia and Ukraine, that they are partially occupied. couldn't do enlarge because they are fulfilling all Copenhagen criteria. If I could ask this question in Brussels one day, I would be very happy, actually, I have to say.
And Madam President, if I may, again, thank you for, I wholly agree that punishing victim is not, not the right way forward. But if we ever reach that point, there are always some practical mechanisms as well that can be used. For instance, a non-extension of certain articles on occupied territories, or those, those are the type of discussions once we reach this point that with the help of our allies like Estonia or Baltic states, we can enter and start discussing, because there are already a number of times where we tried to initiate those discussions, but as you rightly pointed out, again, the first step is where you stand in terms of your democratic credentials. So, because if you are not there yet, then it's, again, then the other door is not opening for you to have a meaningful discussion.
Alex, if I may,
yes.
would you as a
Sure.
security professional like to steer the discussion somehow? Any ideas, any issues that you would like to bring to the table? I noticed also, well, the ever more important cyber question being put in the questions and answers suggestion. But Alex, maybe some ideas from your side.
There are a number of questions which are coming up. The last one is how European Union and NATO could enhance their deterrence options against Russia, and if there is any kind of scenario in which it might be done by including Georgia and Ukraine. And my question would be, in the recent developments, Ambassador Valuebased has touched upon the developments on the border with Belarus and on the Russia-Ukrainian border. We see the hybrid war, as it was qualified by the Polish Prime Minister and many other leaders. That's not the migrants crisis issue, but the hybrid war taking place right now on the border with the NATO and EU member. On the other hand, we see that and the response should be unified, but we see that the outgoing German Chancellor has talked to dictator Lukashenko, and there was a disappointment among a number of leaders inside the European Union and NATO. How should go NATO and EU to prevent the intervention of Russia in Ukraine, to pressure Lukashenko to stop bullying on the border with Poland, and is European Union and NATO ready to involve in more practical ways to protect Ukraine and to protect European Union and NATO border? Thank you.
Well, I find the approach of the European Union vis-à-vis Belarus quite practical. I mean, the sanctions will be put together. The sanction package will definitely be such that, I mean, companies who wish to trade and within and with the European Union, they cannot continue. I mean, this kind of human trafficking, which is now going on. European Union has also been quite assertive in telling the countries from where these people are being transported and victimized in Minsk, that what is going seriously on, that Europe is not considering this a migration issue, and that the status of these people also, we hear reports daily, I mean, how expensive it has been to reach Minsk, etc. These are middle-class people. They of course, they are victims. But also their governments must make sure that these people would know before leaving their own country that they will be victimized and will have to provide also assistance to get them back home. So I find actually European action quite strong on this, and I think Europe has evolved a lot in its thinking also about this issue. We see there is a lot of human suffering. We see indeed that there is a risk to life, etc., and so on. But I mean, giving up and accepting that people can cross the border and then they will be sent back will not send the right signal and will actually induce more human suffering to more people. This needs to be stopped. And therefore, I think Europe has been quite strong, quite clear in its messaging towards Belarus. Sanctions package will come together, I'm quite sure, and will discourage companies, aviation companies included, from participating in this kind of exercise. This is all important. We may have different views indeed, who should call whom. And here I tend to think indeed that talking to Lukashenko is a sign which might be demonstrated as weakening, as our position is getting weaker on the legal position of Lukashenko. We do not recognize the result of the last election and we remain this way. And the question is not that the phone call changes this fact, but it allows to change the perception within the country vis-a-vis Belarusian people themselves. And we shouldn't allow this kind of propagandistic wins to Lukashenko. Here I totally agree. What concerns Ukraine and what is going on Ukrainian borders, then when there was the war in Ukraine that something physical might indeed happen on the borders, Crimean platform was organized by Ukrainian president. And I believe that was a strong human shield of high-level representatives for a high number of countries, which said all that hands off Ukraine. And we have been at the critical moments assertive, and indeed it might be that this autumn demands again from US, from European countries, again some different level of messaging towards Ukraine to protect the country from the further adversarial effects. And we see, well, quite a lot of also vocal diplomatic activity also from US publicly. We don't know what is going on behind the scenes, what kind of messages are being sent by the direct channels. Yes, we're all impatient to see finally the light at the end of the tunnel, but I don't think that we could prognose, well, in the context of 5 years or even a decade, maybe a couple of decades, that we are able to resolve many issues. We are able to hold. I mean, there are periods when you pull and then periods when you hold. And this seems to be the time of holding and not being able to see rapid breakthroughs and the resolutions. And then there is nothing, I mean, which gives us, well, quick relief in our hopes, but the fact that, I mean, Baltic states also remained occupied for 50 years. There was a non-recognition policy ongoing, and definitely during these 50 years, many a question were asked, why are we doing it? This is futile, it doesn't give us anything. And yet, I mean, this strategic patience was there and prevailed. And I feel that, I mean, in the context of Russia's actions, we need to indeed have this kind of strategic patience. Indeed, I mean, it's an empire in decline, its economy is in decline, its demographics is bad, its economy, it's an agrarian country in principle, able to feed itself and the primary sector exporter. It doesn't look like a 21st century adversary to Europe. And it knows it, and therefore it is acting, I mean, in a hybrid ways, in a cheap, smart, devious ways in order to, I mean, build and bring disorder in Europe, hoping that it is able to change the game somehow to its own favor with relatively limited resources. It sees its window of opportunity closing. And that's why you have to indeed be ready for all kind of hybrid and negative actions from this country, recognizing its own kind of limited opportunities, while China sees its opportunities growing because its economy is growing and its possibilities definitely are not limited to a couple of decades ahead of us. I think Russia is feeling pretty nervous about its economic position and therefore also its global position. And this makes it, well, let's say an adversary which is unpredictable right now. We have to learn to live with it in the coming decades. There is no getting away from that.
And to answer, and Madam Ambassador, I wholly agree that NATO and EU have been moving towards this direction to form a new ways of deterrence mechanisms to counter those gray zone hybrid conflicts. I think that two important elements are should coexist when we are talking about deterring an actor like Russia, especially when it employs non-military means or cyber or weaponizes refugees like it's done right now as we speak. One is more traditional deterrence by punishment. And I think that here NATO took very important steps to send the right signal to Russia and to other states. Basically, in 2014, NATO expanded its definition of collective security and included cyber element in Wales summit. And in 2016, in Warsaw, expanded even further and included hybrid warfare in Article 5 collective defense framework. So on one side, again, deterrence by punishment and constantly responding in a proportional way is a very important direction. But at the same time, it's important to adopt the deterrence by denial as well. In other words, building resilience or supporting the target countries to be able to absorb those attacks or those pressures from initiators like Russia. And here I think that supporting Ukraine or Georgia in terms of military equipment, security equipment, or institutional developments are the key elements of deterrence as well. Because if we don't combine deterrence by punishment with resilience building measures, then our ability to respond will be weaker. We need to strengthen the target countries as well.
Dear friends, I have to convey a message that 1 hour and 6 minutes have flown, and let me say maybe a couple of words to sum it up from my side, and then hand it over for Alex to wrap our good webinar up. I would like to remind to all of the good people in the audience that exactly as Ambassador Valuebased also mentioned, we have the feeling that NATO and EU are a bit kind of rising to the occasion and understanding and being more realistic about the threats that we're facing. And one always has to remember that NATO and EU are the clubs of democracies where decisions are taken on the basis of consensus. Therefore, it's always a bit clumsy, always a bit slow, but then on the other hand, it's the best way forward that we have. And also to my Georgian friends, so many times we have used the word window of opportunity. So even if we understand that the window of opportunity for Georgia is not there, the window is not open today, then we always kind of encourage you to prepare and to be ready for the day when the window is open and when you and also EU and NATO can react. But I'll shut up here and give it to Alex to wrap our good webinar up. Thank you.
I was looking at the clock, and I was afraid that Eke would indicate that the 1 hour and 6 minutes are already gone. I was trying not to intervene because the very, very fruitful and interesting discussion was going on. Thank you very much. I really share with my colleague Grigol Valuebased probably that the strategic patience is the couple of words which is not very much beloved in Georgia, but we have to keep with living with this strategic patience and getting ready for the moment when for the momentum when we believe that the time will come, and we very much count on the support from Estonia, from our Estonian friends, and from friends in the European Union and in NATO. I think the unity on the decision of bringing in Georgia and Ukraine will be a reality, will become a reality one day. And I take here as your word, Madam President, that if the only issue is the occupied territories and all the other homework is done, by Georgia and Ukraine. There will be discussions in Brussels on Georgia's and Ukraine's invitation to European Union and NATO. Thank you, and you can give the closing remarks, Madam President, Ambassador.
Well, from my side, while we are waiting for this positive turn of history, I mean, Estonian Eastern Partnership Center, Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, all other Estonian institutions are not only standing by, but are daily, constantly working and cooperating with Ukrainian and Georgian authorities in order to help in institution building in these countries, and this work is continuing. I mean, whether there are currently ups or downs, I mean, in where we see the countries are going, we have continued all through these years, and we will continue. I mean, because we have a moral obligation here as well. We see that the bus doors must not close, and we must not drive away without these countries. And we sincerely hope that the political authorities will make our work easier also in these countries, so that we can take a more positive approach to hoping that this positive turn of history could be rather behind the corner than I mean, years and years and years away from us. So I can promise that we will remain friends for better and for worse.
Madam President, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to engage in this dialogue with you and to share a panel with you. It's again, we very much appreciated your efforts as the President of Estonia in supporting democracies, in supporting Georgian cause. And again, I think that Alex will join me as well. We very much appreciated your unwavering support to the Georgian cause. I also want to thank Rondeli Foundation and Diplomatic Academy of Estonia for inviting me and for this opportunity. And I sincerely hope that the next time when we will be meeting each other, the questions that I will have in mind will be again how to replicate Baltic success and not how to avoid becoming a Belarus that is in my mind right now. So anyway, thank you so much.
Well, dear friends, many thanks. And by the way, to the people in the audience, I think next week we will be having another webinar. So stay tuned, please. And once more, many thanks to our distinguished panelists. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Very much.